Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to this bill, but I actually want to try to give a roadmap on how things to actually be improved here, but by actually showing some of the issues with it, dealing specifically with the premises liability section, about the fact that we have, it's not even competing interest, it's actually the same interest. The interest is for businesses to thrive, but at the same time, we want customers and we want our people to be safe. And so the question becomes, what is the best way to kind of achieve that interest? Whether that can be achieved through some type of compromise language, or it can be achieved almost through closing the courthouse doors, which does this community no good. I would argue that right now our current premises liability, which is in this particular bill, completely closes the courthouse doors from people actually being able to bring a suit on third-party wrongdoers. And why do I say that? Because there's a lot in this particular bill that kind of speaks to that. Looking first at our page 10, which deals with one of the ways of being able to prove a third-party claim is if that the person who's bringing the claim can exploit a specific physical condition of the premises. Well, how would you show that? How would you be able to show that the wrongdoer, the robber, the murderer, whatever it is, that he or she actually exploited a specific physical condition of the premises? It's almost impossible for anybody to be able to show that. They're not going to testify. They may not even be around. So how are you going to be able to show that they actually exploited that condition? But then it becomes even more problematic when we look down on line 226 and we see that the reasonable foreseeability, the risk of wrongful conduct on the premises basically must be substantially greater than the general risk of wrongful conduct in the vicinity of the premises. Now, what you're basically saying is if a person is shot, you would have to show that that conduct is substantially greater than what's happening within the community. But we just talked about the fact that these things are basically many of these places are high crime areas. So it's not beyond imagination that you're going to have people in those vicinity of the community that has what? Been shot. So you're basically foreclosing the courthouse, because how would you prove that it was actually greater, substantially greater than what actually happens within the vicinity? So if you have a shooting, and then within the vicinity there are shootings, then that shooting would not be substantially greater. And then also, how would you even show what happens within the vicinity? Who are you going to call? Are you going to bring up general crime statistics? How are you even going to be able to show that? You basically are actually foreclosing the courthouse with that type of language. But we're going to go further. Just a few more points right quick. If we look at page 12, where we start saying, we're actually starting on page 11. Notwithstanding code sections 51.351 and 53.1.352, no owner or occupier shall be liable for negligent security arising from an injury sustained by a person not upon the premises of the owner or occupier. This deals with the injury. This actually would talk about somebody being chased off someone's property, a business owner's property, who basically could possibly be liable. And if the injury occurred off the property, there could be no liability. This isn't about duty. This isn't about proof. It says there will be no liability, period, none. So the injury, if it happens off the property, there is literally no liability. So if on the property, if on the premises, place is not safe, there have been no cameras, there hasn't been any opportunity to try to keep the people who are shopping there safe, if they get chased off the premises, and because the injury happens off the premises, this says there is no liability, period, if the injury happens off the premises. Not the wrongdoing, the injury itself. That's what it says. Also, it's a similar problem with part 3, which deals with the wrongful conduct of a third person if it happens off of the premises, which directly implicates the Six Flags case, where a person was beaten into a coma because it happened 200 feet off the premises. So those are just some areas of concern within the premises liability piece, and there are a lot more. And I will also address how we can kind of like clean all of that up. But the second part of this is, why would you actually do this from a policy standpoint? From a policy standpoint, why would we try to foreclose the courthouse doors? One of the things that is mentioned many times is, from a policy standpoint, if you don't have this particular legislation, you will have food deserts in high crime areas or poor areas. That has been mentioned many times. You have food deserts in these areas. That would mean that if we looked at states with similar laws, that they do not have food deserts. So I bring you to Alabama and Mississippi. Alabama and Mississippi's laws are actually more strict than the law that we're proposing today. In Alabama, for instance, to be able to prove a claim, you actually have to show that you had similar conduct of 3 prior felonies. So for a person to be able to recover in Alabama, they have to show that on the premises there were 3 prior felonies that took place. That's part of the burden of proof. So naturally, obviously, since they are so strict, there are no food deserts in Alabama. The problem is 16.3% of Alabamans live in food deserts. 150,000 people in Birmingham alone are in a food desert, which is 67% of their population. In Mississippi, for instance, which is similar type of law, they actually passed theirs through statute. Mississippi's a similar type of law. Interesting to know there, 20% of Mississippi residents live in food deserts. So the idea that if you pass these laws that food deserts are going to end just is not accurate, because what goes into food deserts is lack of transportation, poverty issues, and also educational issues. Another reason from a public policy standpoint that we look at this is we talk about runaway juries, which is interesting, because first, we never hear about the juries that don't give anybody any money. They're not runaway. Those are okay. But runaway juries, when we talk about this, is a very interesting term, because we're talking about citizens who are making these determinations, citizens who are actually determining these verdicts. And so here is the scenario that you have to have when you say that these verdicts are so wild and runaway. The scenario is that you have a frivolous claim that goes in front of a jury. First of all, it had to get through a directed verdict and also a motion for summary judgment. But you have this frivolous claim that goes in front of a jury. And who's on these juries? Many times these are people who actually can't get out of jury service. So sometimes they may not have the best job and things of that nature to get out of jury service. So who's on there? So you have these jury members who don't even want to be there. They don't want to even be there. Some of them may be struggling to pay their light bill, struggling to buy groceries. And here they get this case, supposedly, this frivolous nothing case. And here they are sitting there saying, I'm struggling to pay my bills. I'm struggling to pay my grocery bills. I'm struggling to make a living. But you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to take this frivolous case and make you a millionaire. That's total foolishness. No one's going to be doing that. And not only is it one person, 11 other people are also in on it too. And not only are they in on it, apparently the judge hears these frivolous cases and refuses to direct a verdict. The judge hears these frivolous cases and refuses to do a motion for summary judgment. And then it gets to the jury, and these people are sitting there saying, you know, today I might have trouble even making my light bill, but even though this case is the worst case ever, it's frivolous as all get out, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make this person a millionaire. It's foolishness. And what's always interesting is we never talk about what actually triggered these cases. The CVS case and the Six Flags case, where one person was actually shot and another person was beaten into a coma and has long-lasting injuries. We never discuss that. We always just say frivolous, and we always just throw terms out there about that. But actually what's triggered all of this was those two cases where people were genuinely injured. But then that brings to my last point, and that is that the author talked about the racetrack situation, where they had to close. So let's assume the only reason for closing was the potential of having lawsuits, because that was mentioned, the potential of having lawsuits. I would say this, because it was mentioned what racetrack had done. So if the potential of having lawsuits while they closed, one of the things that was mentioned was that they had great camera system, they had security, they had all the state-of-the-art things, great lighting. So if it was only the potential of having a lawsuit, I would say there's actually hope for the racetrack to where we could bring these people back, and it's in the SB 223. Because if you do all of those things under SB 223, you get a rebuttable presumption that can only be overcome by clear and convincing evidence. No frivolous claims would be coming through that type of legal standard. So if you're doing all those things, I would tell everyone who's listening today, if you want racetrack to come back, but you also want people who are harmed to have an opportunity to go to court, this isn't the bill. Have persons who voluntarily do great lighting, voluntarily have great camera systems, voluntarily have a security, as was mentioned, racetrack would, and they would get a rebuttable presumption against any liability that could only be overcome by clear and convincing evidence. No frivolous claim could make it through that kind of standard, and people who are really wrongfully done, they would still get access to the courthouse. With that, I yield the well.